because the average age of first exposure to porn is about age 13.
Yeah.
So really, did 50% of those kids only see porn by age 16? I can't say, but that seemed like a little low.
Before we start, a small disclaimer. The Sex Doctors podcast is not a substitute for medical or psychological advice.
Welcome to the Sex Doctors, featuring Dr. Marianne Brandon, clinical psychologist and diplomate in sex therapy, and Dr. Abraham Morgentaler, renowned urologist and expert in sexual medicine and testosterone therapy. Together, they bring you expert insights into sex, intimacy, and relationships. Let's dive in.
I believe in miracles. Where you from? Hello, Dr. Brandon.
Hello, Dr. Morgentaler.
So good to see you again.
You too. How are you today?
Very good. So here we are for another podcast.
Here we are. I'm so excited. This is a very important article and something that I think really very necessary for parents and soon-to-be parents to sort of start to wrap their mind around.
I can't wait to hear what you've got for us today.
Yeah. Okay. So this comes out of my very favorite journal, the Archives of Sexual Behavior.
Yeah.
Can I say fucking love this journal?
Yeah, this is...
Because really, I just do. And
Archives of...
Sexual Behavior.
Yeah, you actually get this in print form.
I do.
Wow.
I do. Because
there aren't that many journals like that anymore.
That's so true.
Yeah.
I know. I fear every year they're gonna say they're not doing it anymore. But there's just something about it. Something about holding this journal. I enjoy it. I enjoy it for sure.
So this is like your casual bedtime reading?
Well, not necessarily. I would say not necessarily that, but it's certainly my airplane reading.
Good.
You know.
Good.
Okay, so this article was published last year, and it's called U.S. Parents Underestimate Their Children's Pornography Use and Learning. It's by Wright et al., or et al. Means and colleagues. So it was published in 2023.
Yeah.
And I think it's just important topic for parents to realize that their adolescents are watching porn, and their adolescents are going to benefit from some conversation with their parents about it. Because this is a lot for an adolescent to metabolize pornography,
right,
if they don't have kind of an understanding of what they're looking at. You know, the truth of the matter is porn can be a lot for adults, but for kids who haven't had an experience sexually yet, they have no context for understanding what they're seeing. It's really important for parents to get involved in the conversation about all this.
Yeah.
So in this study in particular, they looked at over 600 dyads of a parent and a child. And the kids were about 16. Their average age was about 16. And so what they found was...
And a dyad is just a pair.
Yeah.
Right? It's the father and an adolescent.
Or
right?
a mother and an
parent
adolescent.
And adolescent.
Right. And so what they wanted to get a sense of if their parents knew whether or not their kids were watching porn and what the kids were getting out of it, and were there differences between the kids in terms of being male or female or that
right,
sort of thing. And so what they found was only 50% of these kids had acknowledged seeing porn. Now that surprised me because the average age of first exposure to porn is about age 13.
Yeah.
So really, did 50% of those kids only see porn by age 16? I can't say, but that seemed like a little low.
And this is in the United States, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But nonetheless, so the kids were saying, particularly the boys, they were saying that they learned a lot from porn. Like they learned about sexual positions, and that people learn a lot from porn, whether or not they even know they're learning. Like
right,
we learn unconsciously, frankly.
Sure.
So the boys reported learning more than the girls. The boys, only about 25% of them had talked about this stuff, sex and porn, with their parents before, and only 14% of the girls had done that. So the parents, you know, they need to have a voice here in their kids' sex education. They're like they don't seem to be they're dropping the ball, you know.
So to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what struck you about this?
So the reason I think this is so important is this is a part of your kid's life, whether or not you are aware of it.
Yeah.
And kids, they're developing expectations about sex based on porn. And we all know that porn isn't necessarily realistic for real life sex, and that people don't necessarily even want to do what they're seeing in porn.
Yeah.
They just like watching it. It doesn't mean they want to do it at home.
Yeah.
So there's nothing like bad about porn, except that as adults we know we tease through that. This is something I want to do. This is something I don't. This is a little crazy.
Yeah.
Whatever else. Kids don't have the context to make those kinds of decisions. Yeah. And here's the most important point here is that adolescent brains are developing.
Right.
Okay. So when you and I watch porn, we're not, our brain isn't really going to change as much based on what we're watching as a kid's brain that is kind of forming. It's actually, they use the word pruning in adolescence. At that age, what happens is the brain sort of becomes more efficient, and things that aren't being used, the neural connections sort of dissolve. I don't know if that's the right word, but connections that are being used get enhanced, and it changes the brain. So our brains are always open to change, but the biggest times of our lives are infancy and early adolescence. Okay, so that means that the same porn watched by a 13-year-old is going to have a lot more impact than that same porn watched by a 33-year-old. Yeah. And so parents need to realize that they need to sort of like have a say here and how the child interacts. Now, personally, or how the child understands what they're saying. Personally, I don't think you can prevent, don't be so naive as a parent to think you can prevent your kid from seeing porn. I just don't see how that's realistic anymore.
Yeah.
And plus, if you make it like so taboo, isn't that going to, for at least some kids, enhance the appeal of it and then make them like sort of seek it out more? I would think so. Yeah. So it seems like your best approach as a parent is to stay calm and just sort of talk about it as a part of life. So that's my first sort of reaction here. Yeah. What do you think?
So you were kind enough to share this article with me. I found it fascinating, and I just have to say, it's so much fun being married to you. Forget about this podcast, but just the stuff that we get a chance to discuss, I feel very fortunate, in fact. Like, because there's nothing that's more interesting than what it is, in my opinion, what it is you and I get to talk about.
I agree with that.
So, you know, what struck me about this, and I sometimes get in the weeds a little bit about about some of the details and some of the data. So, first of all, it was really interesting to me just how they did this. So the kids are between 14 and 18, and because they're, except for the 18-year-olds, most of them are below the age of consent, if you will. They only they were only able to get the kids with the parents' consent, and then the invitation went out to the kids. So the parents had to be willing.
Okay, this is a really good point you're making.
Willing to have their kids be part of this thing, and the parents knew this was going to involve questions about pornography.
So we're talking already about a household that's, we can imagine, maybe more likely to be sort of open in terms of concepts and ideas.
I think so.
Because they're allowing their kid to be approached about questions around porn.
That would make sense. Whereas if a parent is really freaked out about this thing, or said, oh, my child would never, or, you know, like they have, there's a term in here that psychologists must love, moral panic. I love that expression, moral panic. So, and you know, when I see it, you can tell me if this has anything to do with what it's meant by it. But I just see a parent panicking. Right? Oh God, my child would never do that. They would never look. If they saw it, they would be ruined for life. They'd be traumatized. So presumably the parents who agreed to this had some level of equanimity about it, and were willing to do it. I think your comment about how only about half of them, boys and girls, boys a little bit more than girls, but not dramatically more. Or hold on, let's go.
I didn't think that was true, but I don't remember.
Actually, no. Here's a good data point. So overall, the total that said that of the adolescents that admitted that they'd seen porn was just over 48%, so about half. For the boys, it was 58%. For the girls, it was 38%. So it's a difference, but that's still a substantial number.
Absolutely, of everybody. But
and you know, when you're a little bit skeptical about it, they have to admit it in order for this to be a yes answer. It means that they're admitting to it, right?
Right.
And it seems to me it's unavoidable. I remember, my younger daughter is now in her early 30s, but she must have been maybe 9 or 10. She was, prepubertal, and she liked Britney Spears. And she called me up one day, totally naive, says, Dad, I was clicking on something for Britney Spears, and I don't even know what I'm looking at. And she brought me upstairs. I looked at her laptop, and, it's a porn site. That was using Britney Spears as like,
oh my God,
whatever they call it, catfishing or something like that. And so she came across it without any intention of it.
Right. Oh, good for her. She got you. Like, what's going on
She
here?
wanted to see Britney Spears,
oh,
not
yeah.
what, not what they were showing.
Doesn't look like Britney Spears.
But so is it, I think it's unavoidable, right?
Oh, yeah, right, exactly.
And aren't there data, you know this better than me, but aren't there data that like the number one use of the internet or one of the top uses is like pornography?
Yeah, it's amazing.
Right. So
it's like the most popular pastime.
Right.
It's got to be.
Yeah. Now, what was interesting, too, is a lot of these questions were about, did you learn about certain things?
Yeah.
Like sexual intercourse from porn? Did you learn? And so when they say, did you learn the most, they're comparing it to other sources of information, which could have been anybody, right? Could be parents, could be peers.
Yeah, but it's not. It's
usually peers, don't
right,
you think?
Right. Kids with older brothers or sisters.
Yeah.
Right.
That's where most people learn about sex.
Right.
And one thing I thought was funny, because it was such a small percentage, learned most about condoms and other birth control methods from porn. It was like 1% for boys and girls.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now again, that's comparing information they may have gotten from somewhere else, but I don't think people watch porn.
Which is a whole other issue that I don't want to really get into today, except that people are using less condoms than ever, and it does make me wonder. Then, are they learning that from porn?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, that was the other thing that got me, I thought was interesting, is that they also asked the parents about if they talked to their children. Now, in this case, about porn. They weren't. I don't think I saw a question about whether they were talking about sex, but about porn. And although, I'm just reading here, although both mothers and fathers were more likely to believe they had talked to sons than daughters, the difference was starker for fathers. So this I thought was interesting. Among fathers, 30.9% said they had talked to sons, but only 10.5% said they had talked to daughters. Now, talked about porn, I'm not sure what that is. Like, doesn't necessarily mean educate them or warn them, or maybe the kid says something, hey, I saw this thing, and there was a conversation. And amongst mothers, 19% said they had talked to sons, while only 11% said they had talked to daughters.
This is not good. I'm glad you're speaking about this. Like, these kids need to have not just because they need to be prepared to understand porn, but they need to be prepared to understand sex. I mean, if they're capable of reproducing, they need to have information. Everybody's got to start talking to these girls. Oh my goodness.
Let me ask you something. You said early on in this conversation, you said there's nothing wrong with porn. But should I interpret that as meaning that you don't think there's any negative aspect of pornography?
No. Interpret that. That's a great question. Interpret that as meaning that the vast majority of people don't find harm from porn, and many find benefit. So statistics right now that are solid, and we'll cover this in other podcasts, like maybe 5 to 7% of men experience themselves of having a problem with porn use, and like 3% of women do. So that doesn't even begin to address how advancing technology is making all of this stuff more intense and more compelling. We're just talking about old-fashioned porn here. But from the perspective of the general population, it's not harmful. But it's still very potent.
Yeah. I'm convinced, I'd like to hear your comment on this. I'm convinced that exposure to pornography changes how especially young people think about what is normal sexually.
I think it's got to. As therapists, we all believe that our experiences from childhood, when we're younger, have a huge impact on our adult life, including our sexual life. And everyone is so ready to recognize that, challenging sexual situations as an adolescent or young person will impact people's sex lives down the road, or just noteworthy experiences impact. So how powerful moments of watching porn wouldn't impact.
Yeah.
Someone's like, I have no idea how that's possible. I think, of course, it's going to impact, which is why we talk about the neurological changes for adolescents and why parents need to intervene.
You know, in my practice as a urologist specializing in sexual medicine, is that I would see a lot of men. This may or may not have been what brought them in, but sometimes it was, who just felt like they were physically inadequately. Generally, they thought their penis was too small.
Oh, gosh, right.
And in the vast majority of cases, their penises were completely normal, sometimes on the generous side.
Such a good point. Such a good point.
And I think some of this has to be related to
I think
porn,
so, too.
because they see these, and what I would say to them is, and all, as we would talk, all of them would say they've seen porn, and even before porn was so available on the internet, there were magazines and stuff too that people could see. And what I would explain is that some of the folks who are selected to be stars in pornographic movies are picked for their physical attributes, right? And it may be a half of the first percentile that's actually taken on because of their size, right? And the same is true with women, right? Is that you can have women who have, enormous breasts, but that's not typical or average.
Right.
Right.
Other concerns women have, they should orgasm faster, or they should squirt, or whatever else. Like, I hear all kinds of stuff from women that I know is coming from their exposure to porn, whether or not they recognize it.
Right.
It's just, our unconscious mind is so powerful in gathering data all the time.
Right.
And it's unconscious because we don't know it's happening.
Yeah. And the other thing that gets me is most of us, unless you belong to a little subculture where you participate in orgies a lot, or if you're a gay male having intercourse or sexual relations with other men, if you're straight, you don't really know a lot about what other men look like when they're erect, sexually aroused, what they do. So your only point of reference is actually the movies.
Right. Oh, that's right. And it's porn.
And so I think it skews things. And
That's
then
really
the
true.
last area is, I think that what people, especially what younger people, think is normal to do with sex, during sex, is also totally comes from pornography.
Yeah.
And I think it also affects, it's like some of the things, let me tell you that when I was a teenager and a young man and playing sports or whatever, like, there was a lot of sex talk, right? But I don't think any of the many other men my age would have conceived of some of the things that occur in pornography.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like that was beyond imagination.
Yeah.
But then it becomes something in there, and then they all do it. You know?
Well, like the popularity of choking now on college campuses. Like, we're assuming that choking during sex has gotten learned from
that's
porn.
really common now, right?
Very common. Like, a third of women in their last sexual experience in college were choked.
Yeah.
More common to be
Unbelievable.
choked during sex than to have a sex toy. Like, it's really very amazing. Now, I don't care what people are doing. Like, of course I mean, as long as it's consensual, that's fine. But there's some potential dangers with choking that it's kind of surprising that it's so common when, you could, especially if you're mixing that with drugs or alcohol, like, that's another topic for another day, but
Where my mind goes to is, how much of this is evolutionary. Now, I don't think it's evolutionary to start choking your partner during sex. Like, I don't think there's a gene for that selects for better offspring.
That wouldn't work. No.
I think it's learned. It's learned. I think it's learned from pornography.
Yeah. So, but I do want to say, this isn't. We're not saying pornography is bad, but we're saying it's potent, and your kids need help in understanding what they're seeing. That's what we're saying.
Yeah, it's a phenomenon, and the kids are going to see it whether the parents know or not, whether the parents approve or not.
Right. So please don't stick your head in the sand. Like, as a parent, like, we need more active, especially as AI is becoming more popular and gets infiltrating the sex tech world. The potency of all this stuff that is, like, unfolding now will blow the parents' socks off if they had any idea. So they need to start dealing with this old-fashioned porn, because things are changing already. So Yeah.
Well, Dr. Brandon,
Yeah.
another podcast. It's been a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure.
Until next time.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to The Sex Doctors with Dr. Marianne Brandon and Dr. Abraham Morgentaler. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and tune in next time for more expert advice on sexual health and relationships.
I believe in miracles. Where you from? You sexy thing, you. I believe in miracles. Since you came